There was this one time I was staying at my uncle's for a while. I wasn't on the best terms with my stepdad, and it was the only option I had financially at the time. My uncle lived in what I would nicely describe as a very, very redneck poor part of town. There were only two roads that led to my uncle's place. One was the long way back into town, and the other was the straight shot, where there stood a supermarket right on the edge of town. There was also a short bridge that continued into a very long, very scarcely lit stretch of road for about 3 miles, and that led to where my uncle lived. When I first arrived, we were driving over that bridge, and my uncle turned and said to me, "Be careful around this bridge at night, son. There are meth addicts that live underneath, and they get up to all kinds of crazy stuff." I didn't think much of that because I'd just arrived there. A month or so later, though, I was working in town at a restaurant that I had to ride my skateboard to because I had no car at the time. One night, after an evening shift at around 12 a.m., I realized I had to use the restroom, and the only thing open was that supermarket. I headed that way since I was already going home, and this was an emergency stop, so to speak. There was no way I was going to make it 3 miles home by skateboard without crapping myself. After a nice, relaxing relieving of myself, I was skating across the wooden bridge, thinking about how much noise I was making on this old rickety thing. That's when I realized, damn it, I'm on the meth bridge right now. I popped my board back into my hand and tried to walk as quietly as possible the rest of the way. I really did not want to be noticed right now. Keep in mind, this road was very dark. There were only streetlights every 100 yards at most. I was a little ways past the bridge now, thinking about how loud I had been. I was wondering if anyone had heard me, so I did a shoulder check, only to see someone in one of those definitely a homeless meth head windbreaker jackets at the light I had just passed. The instant he noticed I'd seen him, he did this awkward pause and started to look around as if we weren't the only two people on this long, dark road. Then he looked me dead in the eyes. It was weird, man. Like I knew it was trouble by the way his posture was and how hard he was trying to look inconspicuous. Still though, that street was as straight as an arrow, and no one had been behind me before I crossed that bridge. I kept on walking, calm at first. Then I checked over my shoulder again. The man was even closer now, and gaining on me with every second. I started to increase my speed. At some point I checked and he was even closer. I just started sprinting. There was a street ahead, a little less than a quarter mile away. I didn't think I'd make it though. I decided I'd have to run off the road into the brush and hop a random fence. There were plenty of ranches around here, so imagine how spread out everything was. Now I'm running full speed through some random person's property, probably scaring all sorts of animals. I jumped the front fence of said property and hid in a bush near their driveway. My only game plan was to swing my board at his face and try to run for my life again. Well, unfortunately for me, the owner of that property just so happened to be arriving home in his pickup truck and was obviously quite pissed to see me hiding in his bushes. He ran over and started screaming at me as to why I was crouched in a bush at the end of his driveway. The whole time he was yelling at me though, I was explaining that I was being followed by someone. That exact moment is when I saw the silhouette of the man following me right on the other side of the bush. I could tell he'd heard me. He slowly started to back away, him making eye contact the whole time as he retreated. I knew that he'd just heard me trying to explain myself. The owner of the property saw that guy too and stopped his screaming at me right away. In fact, he chilled with me for a minute or two. When I asked for a ride, he said he couldn't help me, unfortunately. I had to walk the rest of the way back to my uncle's by myself. That shit was crazy and scary. A pretty gnarly one for me. Really felt like I was being hunted. This happened 10 years ago when I was 19 years old. I was working at a factory at the time, and shared a one-bedroom apartment with a former friend of mine. She let me take the only bedroom, and since the living room was huge anyway, she just slept under the big bay window with a privacy screen between her bed and the couch. Anyway, we used to always joke about this particular building being haunted. A guy had died in our apartment by suicide years before, and sometimes out of the corner of your eye or whatever, you could swear you'd see a person standing in the bathtub behind the curtain or sitting in the chair in the living room. Of course, every time you'd go to look, there would be nothing there. We only ever saw anything though when the window was open. As long as that window was kept closed, there would be no problems. I guess that could easily be explained away as group hysteria or whatever. One night though, as we were sitting there shooting the shit, there was this faint knock at the door, almost barely audible. We were both a little bit unsettled. Something about this just didn't seem right. I can't explain though what about it sounded so off. All I know is I went into fight mode immediately. The mom genes were strong even back then. I grabbed my knife, which I used for scaring away rambunctious drunks, and walked slowly over to the door. Right as I went to reach for the knob, it turned and started to open. I yanked it open the rest of the way, only to see there was nobody there. I saw the doorknob turn. My roommate saw it turn too. I yanked that door open and searched up and down the hallway. There was nothing there. All of a sudden, as I turned around, I heard this sound like someone sprinting up the stairs to the second floor. It scared the hell out of me right then and there. I slammed the door shut as hard as I could. Maybe it was because I'd heard footsteps, but no breathing or any other sounds. It just really unnerved me. I slammed the door, locked it, locked the deadbolt, locked the other deadbolt, and put the chain on too. I propped a dining chair up against the handle for good measure, then went and did the same thing to the door in the kitchen. I closed every curtain so nobody could see inside my apartment either, and we both slept in my bed together that night. I'd never hugged that knife so tight in my entire life. I don't know if it was a ghost or what, but 2 months later I moved out of that apartment and into the one upstairs, and things there were even worse. On a Friday night, I fell asleep on the couch, and my husband tiptoed to bed to let me rest. I'd been having some trouble sleeping and was recovering from a sinus infection at the time. Our couch was pushed right up against a wall, just below a window. Our cat often liked to walk or sit on the back of the couch and try to look out that window. We tried to remember to keep the blinds cracked a little so she could at least see out. Our house was fairly high off the ground. My husband is around 6'4", and when he's at the ground level, I can only barely see his mouth from the top of his head through the window. Anyway, I was sleeping. A sound woke me up, and in my grogginess, I thought it must be the cat fucking with the blinds to peek out again. That was pretty normal behavior for her. In my sleep, I kind of rolled over and vaguely swatted at the back of the couch behind my head. I grumbled something at her too. Usually that was enough to get her to stop. The sound continued though. This time it was a bit different. I was still mostly half asleep, but suddenly there was some sort of metallic scratching. I opened my eyes, now very confused. I sat, stood up, and turned around, fully expecting my cat to have found some more annoying way to mess with my sleep, only to lock eyes with a man who was now prying my window open. I saw from the nose up. His eyes got real big. I screamed. He started to run away. I yelled and my husband grabbed his gun. The cops were called as well. It turned out that more than 5 homes in our area were broken into that very night. In more than one instance, the man had entered the home and poked around, stole things, ate food, even left without the owners ever waking. Had he managed to get into our house when he crawled through that window, he would have landed right on top of me, and who knows what he would have done then. When I was younger, around 15-ish or so, I was part of my local guide troupe. We went to an annual fair/show thing, where you could go and buy bags of stuff, see wood chopping, go on rides, etc. I kept on getting this feeling throughout that something wasn't right all day. Every time I turned around, I would see it, a clown, following me and my friends around. The same clown every time I looked behind us. It watched my group when we were heading towards where the train platform was even, followed us the whole day. It was a horrible feeling I'd never forgotten, and a few years after the clown incident, I suddenly felt it once again. I was just finishing up my shift at work when I noticed an older man hanging around the front of my store, near where I was situated. No big deal, right? Probably just waiting for someone. I left and headed down to wait for my bus home, completely oblivious, except for that odd feeling in my stomach. I sat down to wait for the bus, only for the old guy to walk by me and sit a little bit further down away from me. Okay, seemed he wasn't with anyone then. I got on my bus and sat to the left of the driver at the front. The guy also got on as well. At this point, I was thinking, well, I'll just get off a few stops early and see if it really is just a weird coincidence. I got off, only for the man to get off too. I walked briskly across the road, over a couple of empty lots, to the nearest block of shops and walked in. I looked at the lady behind the counter and whispered to her, "I think some guy is following me. Can you act like I have an appointment, please?" The man waited outside for a moment, but eventually he disappeared. Me and a couple of the ladies looked out the front and back, but we couldn't find him anywhere. I dead sprinted home, jumped into my house, and closed all my blinds and chained the door shut. I was texting my mom while having a panic attack and watching through a slit in the blinds. I could see the old man, now walking back and forth through my neighborhood multiple times. I ran to the kitchen and laid down on the floor, away from all my windows, until my mom came home finally. I didn't see the man again after she arrived, although that man did seem a bit similar to that clown I'd seen all those years ago. This has been on my mind a lot lately, so maybe sharing it will help me get some of this off my chest. So, my father is a criminal, a violent criminal, but I didn't know that when I was little. I didn't know what my father was. To me, he was my daddy, my hero. He protected me from bad dreams and taught me all sorts of things. Sure, sometimes he got mad and hit me or pulled on my hair, and sometimes he thought it was funny to put dead spiders in my hair just to scare me. But I thought this was normal stuff all dads did to their kids. Dads were supposed to discipline their kids and pick on them every now and then, right? My dad loved me. I didn't know, though, that the man I thought was a superhero was really a monster. Then came the night my whole world changed. My life changed. On this particular night, me and my younger brother were in deep sleep when we were suddenly awoken to the sound of a woman's desperate screaming. I was 8 and my brother was 7. It was the most terrifying sound we'd ever heard. We heard her screaming and begging for her life, my dad's voice yelling in anger. And what I now know was the sound of him beating her. Of course, I didn't know what was going on. I only knew my dad must be doing something terrible to that woman. The man I thought was my dad wouldn't hurt anyone who wasn't trying to hurt us. I thought he was a good person. When I realized he was the bad guy, I couldn't trust anything anymore. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know if he was going to come after us for hearing this. I just knew I had to protect my little brother in that moment. My dad heard us crying and burst into the room. I hugged my brother as tight as I could, while my dad screamed at us. Thankfully, he didn't do anything to us other than throw a few things around us. He went back out and began beating the woman once again. I kept holding my brother, rocking him back and forth, telling him not to cry. Everything was going to be okay soon. Then we heard a gunshot. Our grandfather was a hunter, so we knew what guns did, and we knew they killed things. For a few seconds of silence after that gunshot, I really thought my dad had just killed that woman, and maybe we might be next. I was actually thankful when she began to scream again. Screams at least meant she was still alive. I don't know how long I sat in that room holding my brother, trying to figure out what to do, how to get help. We had to listen to that woman suffer, being terrified we'd be next. Eventually, my dad moved the woman away from the room we were in, and then he left altogether. Turns out he'd hogtied her and chained her up in a doghouse. Sometime after that, the cops came and took us away from that home. It's been 16 years since that happened, and every night I still have nightmares of that woman screaming. So this happened a few years back when I was living in a suburban area. I used to ride my longboard around at night and just glide through the sleeping streets as a way to relax and wind down from work. I always rode my board alone. One night I was riding my board as usual, crossing through intersections, when I started getting to the end of the street and into a new one. It was a cloudy night, but the streets were lit with various street lamps. A little bit further up the road, underneath one of these lamps, I thought I could see a man standing there. He seemed to be in a full body suit, all black. I slowed my board down and nervously laughed, calling out to the man, "Hey, that's a nice costume." The man's head shot up to look at me, but he didn't say a word. At this point, I picked up my board and was now holding it. The man slowly started to stumble towards me, and my mind went blank. For some reason, I didn't jump back on my board. I just started running away from him as fast as I could. When I looked back, I could see he was now sprinting after me. I had never been so scared in my life. As I continued to run down the street, I found a family sitting outside on their porch. I approached them, as I realized what I was about to say sounded batshit crazy. I told them about the man in the bodysuit, and they let me stay on the porch with them to blend in. After a few more minutes, we saw the man come walking down the street, doing some bizarre motion, waving his upper body back and forth. We watched as the man glanced over at us and then continued to walk down the street in this strange motion before disappearing around a corner. Thankfully, the family were nice enough to drive me home and not make me walk all the way back with that guy out there, because I sure didn't feel safe doing that this night. To this day, I still don't know what that was. Sometimes I maybe think I even just saw something. Maybe because it was around Halloween and somebody just thought they were being funny. I don't know, but this was one of my worst experiences ever. I saw a drive-by shooting not even a month ago. My wife and I had decided to go to a food truck meet at our local park, figuring it would be a nice outdoor adventure for our 8-month-old son. Driving down that street, there are generally cars parked on both sides, and this day was no exception. As we approached this row of cars, a white minivan turned onto the road headed towards us. Being a nice guy, I stopped to let him through first. Except he didn't come all the way down. He stopped about 15 feet in front of us. All of a sudden, he pulled out a gun and started shooting at the people right in front of us. In no way do we live in a bad neighborhood. It was typical suburbia. One man was shot and killed pretty much instantly. A second girl was shot in the back while running away, blood pouring from the wounds in her back. I threw my car in reverse and slammed it to try and get out of there. After that guy had finished shooting that couple, he hauled ass towards my family. Now we were in reverse, trying to get away from this situation. That's all I could think to do. The man continued to drive towards us and tried to box us in with his car. My eyes locked with his. In that moment, I felt a feeling I couldn't describe or even knew existed before. Bone-chilling would be just the tip of the iceberg in description. I had never been more fearful in my entire life. All I was focused on was the safety of my wife and son. the man raised his gun as if to shoot, and then he simply drove away. It shook us up bad enough to want to move far away, and at the end of the month, we're moving out of state to a quiet mountain town, and I'm gonna try my best not to think about it again. A few weeks ago on a Saturday night, I let my dog Riley into the backyard. He was out there for about 10 minutes, so I opened the back door to call him inside. He didn't come right away though, which was weird because he usually did. I closed the back door and waited. After about 5 or so minutes, I opened the back door once more to let him in. "Riley!" I called. No response. "Riley, come inside. It's time for bed." Again, no response. This is where things started to get weird. I whistled for him to come back. Then, from the other side of the yard, I heard someone whistle back. The exact same whistle I just whistled. "What the fuck?" I muttered under my breath. I thought it must have just been my imagination, so I whistled again. And again, this mystery person whistled back. I shut the door and locked it right away. I went to my grandparents' bedroom and peeked out the window to see if I could see anything. There was nothing there, it seemed. I went back to the kitchen, where the back door was, and flipped the porch light on. I went back to the bedroom, looked out that window too, and again there was nothing to be seen. After that, I decided to go to the living room and tell my grandparents what had just happened. My grandpa told me to grab a flashlight and Riley's leash and check it out myself. He said the whistling was probably just the neighbors across the alley. I grabbed a flashlight and Riley's leash and turned off the porch light because I was afraid of what I might see with it on. So afraid, in fact, I didn't even know if I planned to use the flashlight either. I was a small, skinny 16-year-old male and not good at fighting either. As soon as I stepped out into the cold, dark night, I wished I had gone to my room and retrieved a baseball bat instead of a flashlight. Slowly, I made my descent of the front porch steps. I know I must sound like a little wuss right now, but that shit was fucking scary. One time last year in the middle of the night, I'd heard someone slam the cellar door shut. That had scared me so badly. I was even more scared now. I stopped on the second to last step and looked out into the yard. I finally got enough courage to call out. "Riley?" I called. From right behind me, I heard a soft voice whisper in my ear. "Riley." I turned to see a face peering at me from underneath the porch. I couldn't even scream. The face peering at me was crazed, looked like a crackhead, which was common from where I live. I ran up the stairs. I threw a kick into the dude's face between the spaces so he couldn't grab at me as I ran. Then I jumped inside. I told my grandpa what happened. He grabbed his gun and came back out with me. We searched the whole yard. No sign of that crazy guy, nor my dog Riley. The back gate was wide open, and there was blood on the stairs where that man's face was at. Blood, I guess, maybe from his lip or something. The cops were called, of course, and I explained everything to them. After they spoke to me, they left. Haven't heard anything from them since. Thankfully, the next morning we found Riley perfectly fine, just standing in some random person's driveway. That was good, at least. My guess as to what happened is that the crazy man had already been in my yard when I let Riley out. Riley must have discovered he left the gate open and left to wander around. It was a pretty terrifying experience. I'm just glad my dog wasn't hurt in the end.